The history of black people in Brazil is deeply intertwined with the legacy of slavery, which shaped the country's society, economy, and culture for over 3 centuries. Brazil was the largest recipient of enslaved Africans during the transatlantic slave trade, receiving nearly 5 million people, more than any other country in the Americas. The Portuguese began importing enslaved Africans in the 16th century, primarily due to work on sugar plantation in the northern region of the colony. Over time, slavery expanded into mining, agriculture, and urban labor, making enslaved Africans a central part of the Brazilian economy. Most of these Africans were taken from the West and Central Africa, including present-day Angola, Congo, and Nigeria, in particular from the Yoruba people, but also the Fon from Benin and the Ewe from present-day Togo and Ghana. They brought with them diverse cultures, language, religions, and traditions, many of which have survived and blended into Brazilian society. Despite brutal working conditions, long hours, and harsh punishments, enslaved Africans resisted in many ways through cultural preservation, rebellion, and escape, and the creation of quilombos, or independent communities of runaway slaves. The most famous quilombo was Palmares, led by Zumbi do Palmares, who became a symbol of black resistance in Brazil. Slavery in Brazil lasted until 1888, when the government passed the Lei Aurea, making Brazil the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish slavery. However, freedom came without reparations, land, or support for the newly freed population. The state instead promoted European immigration to widen the population, leaving Afro-Brazilians marginalized and excluded from many social and economic opportunities. Today, people of black African ancestry make up about half of the Brazilian population, although race is different in Brazil than in the United States. In Brazil, race is complex and socially constructed concept shaped by centuries of colonization, slavery, and racial mixing. The Brazilian population includes many different racial and ethnic groups, but two of the largest are black, Preto, and Pardo, mixed race. Understanding the distinction between these two is key to understanding racial relations in Brazil today. While Preto makes up around 10% of the population, they are formed by people often more visibly associated with African physical features and cultural heritage. Pardo or mixed race makes up about 45% today, and they are a blend of different mixture groups, like black-white, black-native, and other mixed identities. Skin tones vary widely, and racial classification often depends on appearance, not just ancestry. The increase of the number of Pardo mixed people individually in Brazil is especially noticeable in recent censuses is due to a combination of social, political, and cultural factors, not just demographic or biological changes. In recent years, more people have chosen to identify as Pardo instead of white or black. Some light-skinned black people may identify as Pardo due to colorism, stigma, or cultural perception. Some people who previously identified as white may now choose Pardo because of the increased awareness of their mixed heritage. Movements like Movimento Negro, Black Movement, and the introduction of affirmative action have led more people to reflect to their racial identity, embrace the non-white or Afro-descendant background, and to choose Pardo if they feel it best represents their mixed ancestry. However, Brazil has a long history of mestizaje, racial mixing, among indigenous European and African population. As a result, many Brazilians have mixed ancestry, even if they don't look obviously black or indigenous. Over generations, racial boundaries blur, and more people feel that Pardo, a broad flexible category, better describe them based on multiple genetic studies. However, black Brazilians are around 50 to 70% African, 20 to 40% European, and around 10% indigenous. Many people who identify as black in Brazil often have significant European ancestry due to high levels of racial mixing during and after slavery. Brazilian society has historical focus on appearance, phenotype, not strict ancestry to define race. So a person with majority African ancestry might still be considered Pardo, and someone with less African ancestry might still be seen as Preto, depending on looks. Regional variations is large. People in Bahia, northeast, tend to have more African ancestry, while in the south there is more European admixture. While African Americans' ancestry, on the other hand, is based on several studies, had an average of around 73 to 85% African ancestry, 15 to 25% European ancestry, and around 1% only indigenous ancestry, which is very low. Most African Americans have majority African ancestry, but with a significant portion of European ancestry, often due to coercive or non-consensual relationships during slavery. Unlike Brazil, the US had this one-drop rule, meaning anyone with African ancestry was often considered black, which affected social and racial identities. Brazil had more racial mixing during and after slavery, partly due to a law encouraging it and social attitudes promoting whitening, branqueamento. The US had more rigid racial boundaries and segregation with less mixing after slavery ended. Although Brazil received more enslaved Africans, nearly 5 million, while the US received about 400,000 directly, but had a large natural increase in populations. Brazil received about 40% of all Africans forcibly transported to the Americas. The US received less than 5, a small portion by comparison. Enslaved Africans in Brazil often lived and worked under extremely harsh conditions, especially on sugar plantations in the northeast and in mines in the state of Minas Gerais, the general mines. Mortality rates were very high due to brutal labor, poor nutrition, and tropical diseases and lack of medical care. Life expectancy for enslaved people was short. Many died within 10 years of arrival. Reproduction was discouraged or neglected by slave owners. Males outnumber females. Enslaved women often had no time to support for families, and infant mortality was very high. Result: Brazil constantly imported new people to replace the ones who died. In the US, enslaved Africans also endured violence and exploitation, but health conditions were somewhat better, especially in comparison to tropical regions like Brazil and the Caribbean. Less exposure to tropical diseases, slave owners encouraged reproduction. Enslaved people were considered economical assets to be bred. Gender ratio was more balanced. Enslaved families had a better chance to form and have children who survived. This led to what historians call self-sustaining slave populations. By the time of emancipation, the US had built a large native-born enslaved population, but still relied more on recent African-born enslaved people. In Brazil, the states with the highest proportion of black and mixed race Afro-Brazilians populations are mostly found in the northern regions, especially Bahia, where around 80% of the population identify as black or Pardo. Other northeastern states like Pernambuco and Maranhão also have a large African descent communities, with about 70% identifying as such. In the north states like Amapá and Pará have significant Afro-indigenous population. The southeast region includes states like Rio de Janeiro and Espírito Santo, where African Brazilians make up around 50 to 60% of the population. This pattern reflects Brazil's history of slavery, plantation economies, and cultural development. Overall, Afro-Brazilians make up the majority in many parts of the country, particularly in the northeast, where Afro-Brazilian culture remains especially vibrant and influential. Black Brazilians have made profound contributions to Brazil's identity in many areas. Culturally, they have shaped music and dance genres such as samba, capoeira, and axé, which are now symbols of Brazilian culture worldwide. In Salvador, Bahia, African influence is visible everywhere in music, religion, cuisine, and festivals. The city is a birthplace of samba, reggae, and axé music, powerful genres blending African rhythm and Brazilian styles. The rhythm of drumming groups like Olodum and Ilha Aia have become internationally famous and fuel social pride and activism. While in Recife, in Pernambuco state, is famous for maracatu, an Afro-Brazilian rhythm and performance tradition that combines powerful drumming, call and response singing, colorful parades. Maracatu has its own roots in the African royal courts and religious ceremonies brought by enslaved Africans, and remains a vibrant expression of cultural identity and resistance. Afro-Brazilian religions like Candomblé and Umbanda have presented and preserved African spiritual traditions and influenced natural culture. In cuisine, dishes like acarajé, vatapá, and feijoada have African roots and are central to Brazilian food culture. Today, Afro-Brazilians continue to influence politics, art, sports, and social movements, playing a vital role in Brazil's ongoing struggle for racial equality and social justice. If you like this video, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.